This is Webster Topley speaking from Washington, D.C., where it's overcast on the banks of the Potomac. Now we continue to grapple with the Kavanaugh candidacy. And let us always stress the great issues of the Kavanaugh candidacy are that this person is a theoretician of dictatorship. He is an opponent of freedom. He is an opponent of the Constitution, which he has nevertheless learned to quote. The confirmation, the installation of this person on the Supreme Court would be a strategic disaster for the United States. And, of course, the Republican Party doesn't care about that. They are devoted to power, to money and power. And the evangelicals, the so-called religious figures who support them, are exposed more and more as nothing but people who sell Christ for money and power. They are heretics. They are apostates in many cases. So let's just remember what the permanent austerity dictatorship is. It's a form of dictatorship that depends on controlling the Supreme Court. It requires a pre-constituted fascist majority in the Supreme Court. And this Kavanaugh is supposed to be the capstone of that. He's the conclusive, the culmination of an effort over decades, going back to Clarence Thomas, which, of course, could have been stopped by the Democratic Party. Joe Biden could have said, yes, we've heard from Anita Hill. We have 4 more women who want to come forward. And that would have been the end of Clarence Thomas. And after those experiences, right, the general idea is after that, you get somebody a little bit more moderate. You could have been done. You could have gotten maybe another Souter or somebody of this sort. But Biden chose not to do that. Biden is removed from consideration for the presidency based on his craven behavior. And he has been interviewed and said, oh, no, I already got it in 1991. I'm sorry, Senator, you failed. And that should be the end of you. You were so worried about your Neil Kinnock plagiarism speech that you refused to fight. So the point is that the Democratic Party is, I think, on the high seas here. They don't know what they're doing. They are providing bad advice. So we are interested in stopping Kavanaugh to stop the permanent austerity dictatorship. Permanent austerity dictatorship means no right to vote, not in any meaningful way, no unions, no mass organizations that could be the nucleus of a mass resistance, a general strike. Some might want to call it mass civil disobedience. An older term is the general strike. This is in many ways the same thing. But in order to do that, you've got to have some unions, some mass organizations to begin with. And, of course, there's also the question of standard of living and related questions. If you have the permanent austerity dictatorship, again, no union rights, no voting rights, no minimum wage, no social legislation, no labor legislation, all struck down, all unconstitutional. Remember the lunatic Senator Mike Lee of Utah says that the child labor laws are unconstitutional. Somebody should have asked Kavanaugh about that. He will strike down the Affordable Care Act. And we have another interesting reminder of his extremism. Here's an interesting article from 2012. Jeffrey Toobin in the New Yorker writes about, in the middle of the Romney campaign, Brett M. Kavanaugh is a judge who sits on the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, which is described as the second most important court in the country. This guy has altogether too much power already. No more. He was a protege of former independent counsel Kenneth Starr, a scoundrel, as you saw this week, right? A pornographer. And the pornographer in chief was Kavanaugh, all of those salacious questions, right? The investigative bodice ripper that he was writing, all those questions, the Monica Lewinsky and the cigar, for those who remember. So he goes back to all that. Now, we point here, Toobin points, to a 3-judge panel of the D.C. Circuit voting 2-1 to uphold the Affordable Care Act, ACA. Kavanaugh dissented primarily on the grounds that it was premature, but he also says, under the Constitution, says Kavanaugh, the president may decline to enforce a statute that regulates private individuals when the president deems that statute unconstitutional, even if a court has held or would hold that statute to be okay, to be constitutional. Get it? The president can take a law which has been approved by the courts, the Affordable Care Act right now. It's a gift to Trump and his anti-popular agenda, his deadly killer austerity, once again, genocidal austerity, that the Supreme Court has said the ACA is okay, Obamacare can stand. According to this, President Trump can come along, the usurper, and say, no, this is no good. I think it's unconstitutional. So in the old days, it was going to be President Santorum or President Romney. But let's remember, Chief Justice John Marshall, one of the greatest of the founding fathers, up there with Washington and Hamilton and Adams and a very few others. Marshall wrote in his landmark opinion, Marbury versus Madison, 1803, quote, it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. So it's judicial review carried out by the federal courts culminating in the Supreme Court, not the little hands of the usurper Trump, right? The boss tweet of Pennsylvania Avenue. So that's a dictatorship. You got to think about, what does that correspond to? Well, you know, Hitler seized power in Germany at the end of January 1933, but it took a while. It took a short time comparatively, much longer for Mussolini back in the 22, 23, 24 into 25. But in the case of Hitler, it took the form of legislation, which was called the Enabling Acts. And the comparison, in case it's confusing, the comparison I'm working towards is to compare the German Enabling Acts of February, I guess, 1933. After the Reichstag fire, we have to compare that to what Kavanaugh writes in his jurisprudence, bought and paid for, of course. So with Kavanaugh, the whole system of laws is out the window. It literally means the president can do whatever he wants. He can do anything. He can overthrow laws. He can defy court orders. You can't investigate him. You can't lay a glove on him. You can't subpoena him. You can't indict him. No documents, no testimony, no nothing. He is above the law. He seems to be above the common run of mortal creatures on this earth. But that is called dictatorship. It is an extreme form, admittedly, of the Bush-Cheney post-9/11 form of dictatorship called the unitary executive. This is the unitary executive with a vengeance, and it is for this overriding reason that if you care about freedom, you've got to fight the Kavanaugh nomination. We'll be back to World Crisis Radio. Now remember to keep up with our daily marching orders, opinions, news, insights, things you won't hear elsewhere, I dare say. And that can be heard every night, Monday through Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, a solid hour of the best political analysis, but activism in the business. So please go to AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv, and join those who are in the know, right? Join the thinking persons, and you'll be much better oriented in the current situation. So, if we take a look at this, we will see that Hitler had to get a carte blanche, essentially, dictatorial powers. The enabling law, das Ermächtigungsgesetz. Das Ermächtigungsgesetz was the measure that passed the parliament. Parliament had to be purged of communists and other opposition forces, but it was rammed through under the hysteria, of course, of the post-Reichstag fire. And we ought to think about that, right? You put together Kavanaugh plus a false flag event, you've got real trouble, because if, for example, somebody decides to declare martial law, well, Kavanaugh is going to be fine with that, right? We ought to somehow get the level of the debate up into the realm of the great questions of state, right? Raison d'etat dictates no Kavanaugh, because we have to have a free country. That is our special, our MacGuffin, if you will. So, in the time of the 1930s, 1933, it was this enabling law that essentially said Hitler has dictatorial powers and can violate all laws. Now, there are similar examples. I would just point to the Vichy, right? The origins of the Vichy fascist regime. 10th of July, 1940, what was left of the French Parliament, having fled Paris, they were in south-central France, but Vichy was there, and they had hotels. That was the big thing. There were lots of hotels because it was a resort. It is a resort. So, on the 10th of July, the National Assembly, including the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies, voted 569 to 80 with 20 abstentions to grant full and extraordinary powers to Marshal Pétain. It also gave him the power to write a new constitution. This is not so different from what Kavanaugh is attributing to Trump, if it comes to this. Act 2, on the following day, Pétain defined his own powers, and he said, I am canceling any laws of the French Third Republic in force up to then that were in conflict with the new powers that he wanted. And all of that would stay in force until de Gaulle carried in on American, British, Canadian, and French bayonets, canceled all of that in August of 1944. So it was an operation masterminded by Pierre Laval, who at the end of the war, of course, was condemned and executed for high treason. So you can use this example. There are other examples, right? The Mussolini example is a bit longer and more complicated. But you've got to realize what the stakes are here. The stakes are enormous, and we've tried to go through them. The stakes include, if Trump stays in power, if he can resist investigations, indictments, subpoenas, and all the rest, his power will be perpetuated. God knows how he will respond. Michael Moore is worried about false flag events. Former Director Brennan of the CIA is worried about sort of wag the dog and military scenarios. We've got all that going on. So if Trump is perpetuated in power and he's protected by the lockstep of the 5 reactionary justices, now made permanent and given a majority through the arrival of Kavanaugh, that is a dictatorship right there, the dictatorship of Trump. So this has got to be stopped. And it includes, of course, the rights of women, absolutely includes them, but it includes the rights of everybody and the survival of this society in the way that we've known it. Now, we summed this all up yesterday evening in our program, right, which you can see, and you can certainly, even if you're not subscribing, which you should do, you can see the headlines. And I think we have to sort of repeat that analysis. There is now a relatively simple choice. The choice is, if Professor Ford, Christine Blasey Ford, appears at the Senate Judiciary Committee next week, anytime that can be agreed on, and is able to testify on national television, the Kavanaugh nomination is doomed. The Kavanaugh nomination cannot survive the personal appearance of Professor Ford. The Republicans know all this. They have been maneuvering to try to hide this fact. They are scared stiff of her. They want to try to intimidate her by saying, well, you'll have to go up against 11 ogres, 11 plug uglies, 11 misogynists, 11 gruff Freemasons of the Republican observance. But in reality, they are a paper tiger because they are afraid of her. They fear her deeply. Their entire political cabal cartel is likely to collapse in the wake of her testimony. There is also to be said that she has, if she does this, she's going to win. A couple of examples here. We have this wonderful expression, which I think is a good proverb, and I think it's true. It's been kicking around in this language for 40 or 50 years, but it is that showing up is 80% of success. This is attributed to a number of different sources. Some say to Woody Allen. Well, we better leave Woody Allen out of this. Going. Thomas A. Edison said 90% of success is perspiration, trying hard. That's another good one. And we also have one that says the world is run by the people who do show up. We'll comment on this. Come back to World Crisis Radio. So again, the choice. If Professor Christine Blasey Ford appears at the Senate Judiciary Committee this coming week for a hearing, if it's televised on national television, that will be the end of the Kavanaugh nomination. He will not survive. And many Republican senators, especially to the degree that they tried to pile on, intimidate her, vilify her, slander her, defame her, they will also share political doom. That is what is within reach. If she appears on nationally televised hearings before the Senate Judiciary Committee next week, the Kavanaugh nomination cannot survive. If, on the other hand, she should fail to appear, for whatever reasons, it won't matter. If she does not appear, Kavanaugh will be swiftly confirmed, and all of her ordeal up to now will have been in vain. Undergoing the death threats, moving her family, worried about her children, concerned about all sorts of personal relationships, and so forth. Kavanaugh will triumph. Trump will triumph. There'll be a ceremony at the White House where the triumphant Trump invests Kavanaugh. They'll probably have some existing reactionary, or maybe Justice Kennedy will appear to administer the oath of office. And you have to think about this. That's going to have two sides. On the one side, Trump will be a winner. Trump will crow. He's a winner. And a lot of people will believe him. And this may, in a certain sense, give Trump a new lease on life. It cannot be ruled out. Trump has now got a kind of economic conjuncture, right? The stock market is at all-time highs, a bubble, of course. The unemployment statistics are at an all-time low. I'm sure they got the same memo that the National Park Service got, right? The Park Service was told, fix those photos so the crowd looks bigger. I'm sure the Bureau of Labor Statistics got a memo from Trump saying, fix those statistics so the unemployment looks lower. The kind of stuff that Trump talked about all during the campaign. As unemployment was declining during the election campaign under Obama, Trump kept saying, I don't believe it. It's all fixed. Of course, that refrain has disappeared now that he's in power. But Trump as a winner may appear to the middle class, to the petty bourgeoisie, and this is their way of operating, whether they don't admit it, but this is actually what they do. It may appear to many that Trump is stronger, that the Democrats, by contrast, are weak, feckless, confused, that they are essentially the puppets and playthings of the various identity groups. In this case, that they simply are puppets of the feminists, and that they have no political strategy of their own, that they're, again, feckless and suffering from terrible political judgment. You have to look at that leadership, right? Look at all those people with Schumer and with Pelosi and various others. We'll tell you a couple of specific cases. But this is fundamentally, it's essentially the same leadership group that presided over the debacle of 2016 with Hillary Clinton. In what way? What has the Democratic Party learned? One would think that what Hillary Clinton should have learned, in addition to, of course, that she was attacked by Russia, attacked by Comey, the FBI, and so forth, all of this freely granted. But there's also this question that she allowed herself to be drawn into the world of the identity groups, but not even all of them. She had a litany of identity groups, and there was one rather large one, rather important one that didn't show up, and that was blue-collar workers in the Rust Belt, in Appalachia, in the Great Lakes region, and so forth, and she somehow didn't have them on her social list. And instead, she followed the demands of the various identity groups. She had no job creation program. And now we have the Democratic Party attempting to strategize under these circumstances, and the result is not good. And I would like to single out, one in particular. I think Senator Gillibrand has shown behavior which is so irresponsible and so fundamentally childish, so much pandering to, I guess, radical feminists. I am not sure exactly who she's playing to. You could see already back in the Al Franken Me Too phase that Senator Gillibrand wanted to get way out in front. And she wanted to be the first to say, Franken must go, get rid of him. Her colleague, isn't there any solidarity in the party? The Republicans are not quite so quick to throw people over the side, under the bus, whatever it is. I think Gillibrand is a walking, talking pandorama to various groups. But in those months, she wanted to be out in front against Franken. And now she's saying that this hearing, in any form, the hearing is a sham. The hearing will be a fake hearing, a sham hearing. And she says, under these conditions, Professor Ford should not go. My God, this is an influential senator from New York State operating at the level of junior high school, if that. This is a real sad story. And, of course, this is very bad political advice. I sincerely hope that Professor Ford doesn't listen to Senator Gillibrand on this. If you don't go, Trump wins. The other side of the coin, of course, is that if you do go, you win. 99% of success in life is just showing up. That, by the way, is a T-shirt that was worn by the world-class American ballerina Kelsey Kirkland, and she said that she had to fight her way through certain problems in life, and that one way she would do it is to put on her T-shirt that said 99% of success is just showing up. And this is back in, it was reported in the New York Times, 1978. 99% of life is showing up. There are other versions that have different percentages. There are other versions that say 90% of success is showing up. And, of course, the conclusion is that the world is run by those who do show up. Now, again, you don't want to be deterred. You don't want to be intimidated by these Republican plug uglies, right? The 11 Bluebeard, yes indeed, Bluebeard. The 11 Bluebeards of the Republican Party that want to torment Dr. Ford will find themselves in the hottest of hot water. I don't think she really has that much to fear. You notice they don't even want to do it. They're fleeing. They say, bring in a ringer. Bring in an outside ringer because we don't want to do it. It's like if you have an amateur football team and you bring in somebody from the NFL to make a few bucks on some holiday evening. This is where the Republicans are. So our position is, by all means, bring it out for all means and present the Republicans for a bad night. But then, at the end of the day, appear. Be there and you will win. And America is rooting Professor Ford. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio in Washington, D.C. So we understand that it is no fun to go up against the panel of these plug uglies. On the other hand, you'll have demonstrators in the room. You'll have the Democrats who, at least the presidential candidates, will be attempting to outdo each other in defending you. You have the Republican senators already intimidated. They are afraid. They are running scared. They want to bring in this outside questioner, outside counsel, who will be a woman because they're afraid. They're scared stiff of going up against Professor Ford. So Professor Ford and her lawyers, I think, mistake the situation. They have minimal leverage. Maybe they have some, but in some other ways they don't have any. The Republicans don't want her to come because the bottom line is, if she does not come, Kavanaugh will be approved. And that is a catastrophe for the United States. And remember, the survival of the Republic is the supreme law. Epikeia. We have not been given this Constitution to lead the American people over a cliff. The Constitution is not a suicide pact. So we need to make this system work, and the way it works is she appears, and as we said the other day, if she comes in and speaks with the eloquence of Cicero and Demosthenes, she wins. If she comes in and gives a normal prose presentation of what has happened, she wins. If she stumbles and is tongue-tied and gets flustered, she wins. If she goes out on a stretcher, if she faints, if she bursts into tears, she wins. If she just shows up, it won't matter what she does. This guy Kavanaugh will be the loser. Now, the discussions have been going on as of Thursday evening and now Friday, up till about, it's almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon as we record. So originally the Republicans said, show up on Monday, submit the documents on Friday morning. Friday morning has passed, and it doesn't look like those documents have been submitted, I think that's a mistake. Submit the documents. You want your story out there. Submit them and leak them. Get the Democratic members of the committee to leak them and get that. That will fill the newspapers on Saturday and Sunday. Be aggressive. Fight. So the original one was the Republicans say, come on Monday, take it or leave it, come on Monday. And again, if it comes down to that, I'd say, I'll take it. I'll take it. The Republicans get more complacent when it looks like she won't show up, and then they get tremendously nervous, scared stiff, when it becomes clear that she may or probably will show up. So the Professor Ford camp wanted Thursday. That's fine. It's reasonable. The Republicans have come back with Wednesday. All right, fine. I would take it. Take Wednesday. And then a couple of other things. Who will testify and in what order? The Ford people say we want Kavanaugh first and then Ford. I think this sort of goes against the whole ethos of the Anglo-Saxon system. If there's somebody who appears more or less as an accuser, then that person should go first, right? The prosecution goes first, then the defense. Although this is not a trial, remember that. There's no presumption of innocence, no rules of evidence, no beyond a reasonable doubt. None of that applies. The burden of proof is on Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh is demanding a very attractive patronage job. It's a political patronage job, and he wants it for life. So therefore, he's got to perform and win the votes of the senators. There's no presumption of innocence. The burden of everything is on him. And no crime needs to be shown. It's not a crime. Just, is this the best person? Is this the best we can do when it comes to our Supreme Court? A would-be rapist or a suspected would-be rapist? Is that the best we can do? I don't think so. So I think it's probably going to be necessary to say, okay, Ford goes first, Kavanaugh goes second. Should they bring in an independent lawyer, a woman who will do the cross-examination or the grilling, I would fight that a bit harder. But on the other hand, don't make the whole thing depend on that. Because the main thing you're going to do is give your statement. And it is correct to demand unlimited time for that statement, whatever you need. Then, concerning the number of television cameras, she seems to want to have a pool of a few cameras representing the rest of the networks. I guess that's okay, but I think it shows the wrong mentality. You want to have 1 million cameras because you're going to be torpedoing Kavanaugh. He's going to be finished. He will be kaput when you're done with this. So you want everybody in the world to see that. So I think, once again, I can understand the desire to get the most mileage possible out of the fact that the Republicans are unreasonable, that they're rude, that they're nasty, that they schedule things without asking you. That is an insult, of course. You want to get the most mileage you can. But now we've had a whole week of that, right? From Monday to Friday, it's been nothing but that. So at this point, I also have to realize that although the pro-feminist strata of the population may be gratified by seeing so many barriers being thrown up, there are, I think, at least as many others who say, okay, now you're getting too fussy, too picky. A lot of them will start reasoning in terms of stereotypes of female behavior that you do not want, that she's being unreasonable, and so forth. So I think you've got to realize that you want to turn away from any such danger. And the main thing is now, the demands that you have can best be obtained by appearing and by testifying. You want an FBI investigation? You will not get that in advance, although we're told by the New York Times that the FBI is now talking to Professor Ford about the death threats that she has received. We're also told that the U.S. Marshals are talking to Kavanaugh about the death threats that he has received. This is just the way it is if you want to be in public life, right? That's You can't let that faze you, more or less. But the FBI investigation can be obtained through the process of appearing. In other words, appear, tell the story, hard-hitting, dramatic as it is inherently. Any version of it will be that. And therefore, out of that, you get your FBI investigation and more. You want to have witnesses? Well, of course. You want to have this guy Judge, the eyewitness who was in the room, who, at least according to some accounts, shouted, if not encouragement, then somehow provided a background, perhaps made noise, right? He could be called an accessory, according to some legal theories. So that might be somebody. Now, you want him to testify. If the Republicans say no, well, then keep fighting. Go through with the testimony, and you'll find the judge will be hauled in there soon enough. So the idea is, rather than see all of these demands as demands made in advance, look at them in a dialectical unity that by appearing and by testifying, you will get the vast majority of those demands. Now, the other thing, of course, public opinion. As Abraham Lincoln said, public sentiment is everything. Right now, public sentiment is 38% say no to Kavanaugh. That was already historically low. It has increased by 9% since the last similar poll. 34% support him, and you've got this big pool, 35% up. The vast majority of those, through the human drama of should appear. Fine to have done all the maneuvers, but now that has to end, and you're going to appear. And we'll be back in a minute. We will. World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. I should point out that the demand being made here, the demand I make, the demand of the Tax Wall Street Party and other political forces of goodwill, is primarily that Kavanaugh should be removed from consideration, that we've seen him. He's a boozer. We see his yearbook. We see all kinds of deplorable tendencies. We see his lies, lying to the Senate, right? A very serious matter about his pal Manny Miranda and the stolen emails that he obviously received. This guy was a fence for stolen emails, stolen by Republican committee staffers, and this was all in the service of fascist judges. These were fascist judges under Bush the Younger, right, extreme right-wing judges who were far out of the mainstream, and in order to get them through, he spied. His machine spied on the Democrats in the committee, including Senator Leahy. So this is a person of low character. He is a scoundrel, in other words. And we are astonished, maybe not astonished. We deplore the behavior of Ralph Reed, the value voters. We had the value voters here in Washington. I don't know what values those are. Money and power is their value. They, again, buy and sell Christ and religion. Mitch McConnell appeared there and he said to the value voters, keep the faith. We're going to get Kavanaugh installed on the Supreme Court. This is one of the most shabby, scurrilous operations I've ever seen. But we had Franklin Graham coming out saying, how dare you, Republicans? How dare you listen to this woman? Ride roughshod over the woman. Ignore her. Don't let that slow you down. Vote this week. They would have had the vote yesterday, right? Thursday. So these are religious leaders. There's this guy Jeffers and Reed and the chaplain of power, of course, the hereditary chaplain of whatever power there is. It doesn't matter. That would be Franklin Graham. They want Kavanaugh approved yesterday. They wanted to vote already. They don't want to have any hearing. And neither do we. We want Kavanaugh out. Kavanaugh should be removed a priori. That would spare her. That would spare Mrs. Professor Ford any ordeal. But the problem is her name is already out. The death threats have already come in. She's already had her life thrown into an upheaval. You've passed through the ordeal now. Now harvest the tremendous benefit for the sake of the country. And of course, it's a divider that goes down society, right? The people that support Trump and of course his machine, Senator Grassley of Iowa. That would be Grassley. You can see also other scoundrels come forward. Dean Heller, the current senator from Nevada, said, don't worry, he says to his supporters, we've had a little hiccup. Little hiccup is charges of attempted rape. That's a hiccup? So we can't go through all the details. We do much more of that during the week, but you get the idea. Kavanaugh should be excluded right away, but he's not going to step down. Trump is not going to withdraw him. The senators are not going to vote against him. They're going to have to be shamed into it, and that is where the role of Professor Ford becomes so essential. Now, as we move on, concerning the Trump regime and its fortunes, we have all kinds of reports that Michael Cohen, and we finally heard this on one of the cable news shows, that Michael Cohen is singing like Luciano Pavarotti. He is singing his heart out to Bob Mueller and Weissman and other members of the Mueller special counsel team. He will be the veritable Caruso of cooperating witnesses because he doesn't have a deal. He's facing lots of jail time, and his insights into the family businesses, the family, and all the rest of it are indeed precious. So this is going on, and these wheels are grinding in the background. Now, this afternoon, we've gotten this interesting and unverified, I would say. It's not clear how good the sourcing is. Rosenstein, Deputy Attorney General, suggested secretly recording Trump and discussed the 25th Amendment. Now, let me hasten to say he denies it. There's a statement quickly put out by Rosenstein saying, no, I didn't do this. But the story by Adam Goldman and Michael S. Schmidt, the Deputy Attorney General, Rod J. Rosenstein, suggested last year that he should secretly record President Trump in the White House to expose the chaos consuming the administration, and discussed recruiting cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove Mr. Trump from office for being unfit. This was in the wake of the Comey firing, when Trump was divulging state secrets to these Russians in the Oval Office, Lavrov and Kislyak. Other revelations about Trump demanding pledges of personal loyalty and fealty to Comey, not the Constitution, but to the Trump political fortunes. Rosenstein had been on the job for 2 weeks. He had been used by Trump, right? He wrote a memo in good faith about how bad it was what Comey had done to Hillary Clinton. Yes, and that investigation. So he put this out according to some sources here. These sources are somewhat buried. It's not clear how well sourced it is. So they treat this as the fruits of a crisis situation. Rosenstein said the New York Times story is inaccurate and factually incorrect. I will not further comment on a story based on anonymous sources who are obviously biased against the department and are advancing their own personal agenda. But let me be clear, based on my personal dealings with the president, there's no basis for the 25th Amendment being invoked. Now, he may be right that this has been planted by the pro-Trump forces. So we have given you the main facts, and from here we go on. But we have to remember now that if it's not the septet from Lucia di Lammermoor, it may already be the quartet from Rigoletto, because you've got Manafort, you've got Cohen, you've got that guy Weisselberg, and Pecker is also thought to be a virtuoso, a maestro of reporting. In this, we're told there are some stories flying around that Cohen did indeed go to Prague as the dodgy dossier, right? The dossier that Hannity and company love to hate. It looks like there's another point where that was confirmed. So, once again, we're going to have to leave behind the question of Kavanaugh, but no Kavanaugh, and please, Professor Ford, come and testify. There'll probably be public, demonstrations in the streets supporting her. Now, the other one is Trump and the FISA warrants. We did a detailed presentation during the week on the American Sister Program. The FISA warrants are not based on the dossier, and they're not just based on Australia. They're based on 7 countries, not one, reporting. Back in a minute. Back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, we have shown through articles in the London Guardian and in other publications, in the Yahoo News and in International Business Daily, I think it is, the beginning of the dossier is a matter of 7 allied, friendly nations reporting in alarm the multiplicity of contacts between agents of Trump and agents of the Kremlin. In some cases, apparently, because we don't know the details, some of these are GRU, SVR sorts of people, spooks. But in some cases, they are simply oligarchs, and there might even be some oligarchs, but from the mafia side of the Russian oligarchy. So the starting point is these. The one from Australia, we know this, that Mifsud allegedly told Papadopoulos the Russians have dirt on Hillary. Papadopoulos then, in a drunken evening, shared this, boasted of this to the top Australian diplomat, their representative in London. That was eventually reported to the Australian intelligence and thence to the United States. Okay, so that's one of them. But the others, the British, Netherlands, France, Germany, Poland, and Estonia. These are 7 countries, small ones, big ones, and all different kinds. And they all agreed, my God, there are meetings between the Trump team and the Kremlin team all over the place. It started, the British say that they were the first. This was in late 2015, and by the middle of 2016, the head of GCHQ, General Communications Headquarters, it is Cheltenham, England. It is the equivalent of Fort Meade, Maryland, the National Security Agency, and the United States Cyber Command. So they all agreed that there's something going on. So the head of this was a guy called Hannigan. Hannigan comes flying over with documents in his briefcase. So it's a director to director. He goes to see Brennan, and after that, Brennan sets up a task force, including the FBI, and that then begins to drag the whole U.S. administration under Obama, who was absolutely inert, as we know. and Susan Rice, worse than useless, telling people not to do things. That would be the Wellender possibilities, right, coming out of the National Security Council, ways to fight back against Russia during the election. So this is where it comes from. And we're getting now, this is the story that, again, if you watch this insufferable Hannity with his friends, the wild-eyed Sarah A. Carter and the growling Greg Jarrett, who has a book out now about the Russia fakery, and they're putting out books about the deep state and so forth. Half the people in the deep state are Trump appointees, people in his own White House. So Trump is desperately attempting to sabotage the Russiagate Mueller investigation because he knows that's Trumpgate. So part of it is to try once again to make this revolve around the FISA warrants. Trump is now saying we have 21 pages of secret documents that we want to reveal. However, we're getting pushback. Brennan had gone on television a couple of days ago and said, what's going to happen here is that people in the bureaucracy, especially Dan Coates and Christopher Wray and a couple of others, right, the new guy at the National Security Agency, they're going to have to decide if they're going to do that. What they're likely to do is to slow it down, work to rule, right? These are very sensitive matters. They cannot be hurried, but why don't you slow them down a little bit more? Because essentially this stuff should not be revealed. And we've also got then a series of complaints. Now, I'm trying to find details about this. I haven't gotten very far, but I'm sure we'll have this in several days, that allied countries, allied foreign nations, friendly nations from around the world are attempting to stop this. They say, don't you dare. Some of that is those are our secrets that Trump is playing with. Now, we want to stress again that the targeting here, Comey is one thing, and we probably separate him out. But when we get to McCabe, Strzok, Page, Orr, and a couple of others that are being targeted, these people are the part of the FBI that is specialized in Russian mafia, and not just Russian mafia, but Russian organized crime money laundering into the United States, at the center of which is money laundering through luxury real estate. There are other dimensions. The names that come up in this department, if you see who are the antagonists of people like Bruce Orr, Lisa Page, Strzok, McCabe over time, you're going to see names like Semyon Mogilevich. This is the boss of bosses, the most powerful gangster in the world, according to the FBI. He was on the FBI most wanted list. For some reason, he was taken off. I wonder why. Was that some political corruption? Mogilevich, known for all kinds of rackets, and in particular, human trafficking. Mogilevich was somebody who opened up something called the Black and White Clubs. The Black and White Clubs was a nightclub chain in Eastern Europe that apparently had an included feature, which was the presence of young girls or models, but that many of these, of course, had been trafficked. So it was Bruce Orr who made sure that Mogilevich did not get a sweetheart plea deal on crimes that he had been indicted for in the United States. Later on, Bruce Orr made sure that his passport, that his travel visas were not approved. Same thing goes for Deripaska. Deripaska was kicked out of the United States, wanted desperately to come in. He was able to get Lavrov to make repeated demands. So what Trump is doing here is blindly disrupting the anti-Russian mafia sectors of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This is Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. It is the fateful afternoon of Friday, the 21st of September. As we tape this program, we are hoping that the arrangements can be announced for when Professor Ford will testify. We hope that her team is able to prevail on as many of those details as possible. But the main thing is to save the bacon for the United States and our future and our lives and our survivability. She needs to testify because that will deliver a catastrophic blow, a final blow, a coup de grace to the nomination of Kavanaugh. And get the best deal you can, make as much propaganda hay as you can, but at the end of the day, you've got to be there. That is our appeal. And, of course, we are warm supporters of Professor Ford and what she's doing. There'll be lots of people in the streets in favor of her, and the Republicans may get the idea that there are pitchforks outside the Capitol watching what they do inside. And, of course, there will be protesters inside. Now, let's switch over to Brexit. We've always posited this idea of a kind of parallelism between the insane folly of the Trump presidency, something that should never have happened, an aberration, a lusus naturae, a freak of nature, a gaming of the American system by sinister forces. There's a long New York Times summary of all this during the week, which you should take a look at. It's long and detailed. It has some flaws. We'll point out the flaws on another occasion. During the week, I'm afraid that's what we can do at that level of detail. But there's a parallel between the Trump presidency and the Brexit. Right? These are two parallel insane adventures of the English-speaking world. They are manipulated. They are results to a large degree, not exclusively, but a cooperation between the oligarchs of the East, that is the Russian mafia and the Kremlin forces, and the oligarchs of the West, the financier oligarchs. In the case of London, there's also a very strong Chinese angle that London thought they could break out of the European Union and then simply start working as the bankers for China. And they thought that path was realistic. Well, that's about as realistic as the Cliveden set, saying, well, we'll manipulate Hitler so he only goes east and leaves us alone. So we'll get rid of Hitler. He can take care of Stalin. They'll destroy each other. This is about the same level of idiocy and amateurism. So Brexit, it's got to be stopped. It's got to be rolled back. It was done under false pretenses. It was the work of Rupert Murdoch and his lying news media, the demagogue Farage and others, the other demagogue, of course, Boris Johnson, another very superficial demagogue. And we're now getting close to the end of the road for this particular illusion. We have had talks now between the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, and the President of the European Union, Donald Tusk of Poland, and out of this has come a rebuff of May. May embodying the historical arrogance, but also the superficiality, the Colonel Blimp arrogance of the British, and perfide Albion, perfidious Albion, right? The treachery that is built into the Foreign Office and so forth. Those values, whatever they were, those traditions, have now run up against a brick wall. And the answer is, May says, essentially it's an attempt by May to promote the disintegration of the European Union from within, under the pretext of saying we need this for the British to fare well. Well, Brexit is impossible. After all those decades, these economies have grown together in a way that does not allow them to be separated. It would be an act of violence. And that is what Tusk essentially communicated to May, that you're not going to get a special deal. It looks like you're headed with the mentality that you have demanding special concessions. You're leaving and you want concessions? It just makes no sense. There is no point to this. So Tusk communicated that to her, and the British, of course, are whining that they've been unfairly treated, she says, we didn't get respectful treatment. This is just crazy. They have rubbed raw the sensibilities of continental Europe with this constant barrage of demands. And this goes back to Thatcher. It goes back to the 1970s, their attacks on de Gaulle. Then they couldn't wait to get in. And de Gaulle rightly said, no, you're not coming in because you'll never be a part of this. You'll be a Trojan horse for something else. Now, the British today have a great opportunity to put an end to that. And the way you put an end to it is the people's vote. The people's vote. Now, here's a couple of people. I'm hoping that the Labour Party can get some leadership. This character, Jeremy Corbyn, is a pretty miserable excuse for a Labour Party leader. Let's talk to people who have got some more grit. Here's David Lammy of the Labour Party. This is Member of Parliament. Theresa May has been repeating the hard Eurosceptic spin that the referendum was a vote to leave the customs union. Nonsense. No specific form of Brexit was on the ballot, and no one voted for the no deal we're on track for. This is precisely why we need a people's vote. The people's vote. So that's what we're for, too. In other words, there has to be another vote. Here's the mayor of London. Right? The mayor of London says, today Theresa May took Britain another step closer to the worst possible outcome from the Brexit negotiations, a catastrophic no deal that would hammer jobs and growth. It's clearer than ever that the British public must have a final say. Here's another guy, Chris Leslie, Member of Parliament. May has reached the end of the road with her Brexit strategy. It's time to get a grip. Parliament must be reconvened so we can break the logjam in the national interest and then give the public, the voters, the British people, the final say in a people's vote. What you bought, of course, with the Brexit vote was a pig in a poke. Here's what you're getting now. Companies stockpiling drugs, chocolate, extra spare parts. Airbus is saying we're going to need extra parts because we may not be able to get them. BMW is going to shut down, looking towards next March when the divorce is supposed to happen. Some of the world's biggest companies are drawing up plans for the unplannable. A March divorce between Britain and the European Union in which even some basic parameters have yet to be hammered out. Big pharmaceutical firms like Pfizer and GlaxoSmithKline PLC are stockpiling medicines on orders from the British government. Is that what you voted for? I didn't hear Farage and Bojo talking about this. I heard them talking about singing tomorrow's our sovereignty is going to come home. We can make our own rules. Yeah, this is the world. Long delays at the border, a split, a hard border, maybe a fortified border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. Cadbury Chocolate Company is hoarding supplies of chocolate and other raw materials. Is that what you voted for? Nobody in his right mind voted for that. It was the Russian embassy, Russian money, Russian demagoguery, and so forth. So we join with the persons of goodwill. It's time for a people's vote. And if that Corbyn is not going to come out and call for a people's vote, then get rid of him. Get rid of him fast. Back in a minute on World Crisis. World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, we have to treat a topic here at the conclusion, which is not the most attractive. I mean, as soon as you talk about Kavanaugh, you're in the land of the scurrilous. But we have to now deal with a hysterical propaganda line that is being purveyed by people who really ought to know better. But we're in a kind of a dark age here, in case you haven't noticed. So you gotta learn to take what comes and deal with it as it deserves. The story here is QAnon. QAnon, the favorite of the alt-right, of the paranoid set, those who are lost in snowbanks of paranoia. And it seems to revolve around a pedophile conspiracy in the Democratic Party. And this is puzzling in many ways. How do you get to this? You'll remember one of the extreme forms was Pizzagate. It was the baseless, idiotic allegation that the pizza parlor in the northern, essentially up 355. What can we say? In the northern part of the District of Columbia, there was this pizza parlor which was attacked then by the paranoids, presumably by Russian bots, by others, saying that this was the headquarters of a pedophile conspiracy. It came out of the, allegedly, it came out of some hysterical fantasizing on the Podesta emails, and it led to a shooting. Right? So it's a piece of absolute insanity. But you really wonder, where does this come from? Because this is still being purveyed. First of all, why do you get the idea that the Democratic Party is somehow full of pedophiles? I've been looking around for some research on this, and one of the things you do find is that when you go back to the Republicans and the reactionaries in the McCarthy period, you'll find that they regarded sexual deviance as one of their main clubs that they could use to beat their opponents over the head. In the days of Senator Joseph McCarthy and his ilk, if you were a woman giving McCarthy or people like this a hard time, you would be branded, maybe not by the senator himself, but by his larger cartel of supporters. Nymphomaniac was one of the words they would throw around. Nymphomaniac, yes, nymphomaniac. And then, of course, for men it was homosexual. That was the typical one in those days. Now, as time has gone on, perhaps those have lost some of their polemical bite. So we're now left with pedophiles. So the big QAnon theory is that the Democratic Party is the home of the pedophiles, that Podesta and Hillary Clinton are part of this. The problem is they don't have any proof. This is all manufactured out of thin air, and it seems to be the bots, right? The Kremlin bots that help it along. Now let's just point out a couple of things. First of all, everybody remembers Judge Moore in Alabama. This week we've got a group called Demand Justice, which is reminding us that Trump, the accused sex offender, endorsed Judge Roy Moore of Alabama for the United States Senate. So Trump, the sex offender, goes for Moore, the sex offender, accused by these women at least, and then now he's got Kavanaugh, who seems to have a problem of a somewhat similar nature. So that's Roy Moore, and that was the Republican Party, unless I missed my guess. Now let's also remind ourselves a couple of other things. We have a leading figure of the current Russiagate investigation, and that is the Middle East operative, George Nader. George Nader has been investigated by the Mueller team, and he got a subpoena in January 2018. He was questioned and was granted immunity in exchange for information in this investigation. So this is a Republican bigwig. He took part in the Seychelles meeting, just reading out media, the Seychelles between various Trump representatives, Eric Prince in particular, with a Russian representative of a Russian investment fund. This is Kirill Dmitriev, allegedly, head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund. So Nader, once again, to sum it up, in January 2017, Nader was reported at a meeting in the Seychelles Islands in the Indian Ocean off the east coast of Africa between Emiratis, United Arab Emirates. Erik Prince, he was present when Prince met with officials from the UAE and Kirill Dmitriev of the Russian Investment Fund. So what's with this Nader? Well, he has been repeatedly charged with child pornography, we read here, especially child pornography from the Netherlands, child pornography from Germany. A federal court in Virginia in 1991 gave him a 6-month sentence on a felony charge of transporting German pornographic videotapes, but this was put under seal because of the sensitive nature of the work, and now we have in 2003, quoting directly from Wikipedia, in Prague, Czech Republic, Nader was convicted of sexually abusing 10 boys, for which he served 1 year in prison. These events occurred between 1999 and 2002, some cases at the Hilton Prague Hotel. So we have Judge Moore, we have George Nader. We have a more recent event now. This is from the press this week, and it is a state senator. Let's see if we can find these very interesting details. This is a former Republican state senator, a Republican, Senator Ralph Shorty, former Oklahoma state senator, was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison on September 17th, and the charge was child sex trafficking. U.S. District Judge Timothy DeGiusti imposed a fine which will be up to $250,000, and that will be specified at a later date. Shorty pleaded guilty in November in exchange for prosecutors dropping 3 child pornography charges against him. And he said he did that for the sake of himself and his family. So, ex-Oklahoma State Senator, Republican, gets 15-year prison sentence for child sex trafficking. And I'm reading here from an article by Kathleen Joyce of Fox News, which appeared here 3 days ago. Then, of course, we want to go back to a couple of events, right? One is this famous headline in the Washington Times. The Washington Times, not the Washington Post, but the Washington Times. Thursday, June 29th, 1989, the headline, Homosexual Prostitution Inquiry Ensnares VIPs with Reagan and Bush. Call boys took midnight tour of White House. And the article by Paul M. Rodriguez and George Archibald, a homosexual prostitution ring is under investigation by federal and district authorities. It includes among its clients key officials of the Reagan and Bush administrations, military officers, congressional aides, U.S. and foreign businessmen with close ties to Washington political elite. And then, of course, if we'd had time, we're going to take you out to the Franklin Community Savings and Loan in Omaha, Nebraska, and the saga there of Larry King, top Republican activist who sang that Star-Spangled Banner at the Republican convention of the Reagan. So, dear QAnon, you oracle, QAnon, tell us, how does this add up? And shouldn't you direct your attention to some of the evidence, very superficial, that we have just brought forward? We'll see you next.